Hello, thank you for joining the Housing Infrastructure and Communities Canada's presentation on the Active Transportation Fund. This presentation will provide information on the Active Transportation Fund's capital project stream specifically, and will cover topics such as program eligibility, application development, and the application process. The Active Transportation Fund, launched under the targeted funding stream of the Canada Public Transit Fund, is dedicated to building active transportation networks such as pathways, bike lanes, trails, and pedestrian bridges throughout Canada, a network powered by people. As part of the Government of Canada's commitment to achieving reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, a minimum of 10% of the fund is dedicated for Indigenous projects.
The capital project stream provides funding for projects that involve the construction or new active transportation infrastructure or enhancements to existing infrastructure. This includes design features, which would improve comfort, convenience, enjoyability, and safety for active transportation users. Eligible capital projects may include building or enhancing infrastructure for active transportation, such as multi-use paths, sidewalks, footbridges, separated bicycle lanes, and connections to other roadways, improving the design and safety features that encourage increased active transportation, such as lighting, greenery, benches, and building or enhancing safety features which promote active transportation, such as crosswalks, speed bumps, fences, and wayfinding signage. Eligible recipients may submit multiple applications for different capital projects. Eligible recipients include municipal, local, or regional governments, provincial and territorial governments, public sector bodies, including academic institutions, not-for-profit organizations, and Indigenous organizations, including Indigenous development corporations. Eligible recipients can directly undertake the projects, or they may distribute funding to other recipients who are part of the project delivery. For example, in a project which spans across many municipalities, a leading municipality who has an agreement with HICC can distribute the funds to other parties if the project is approved. Please note individuals, private citizens, for-profit entities, with exception of Indigenous development corporations, and federal entities cannot apply for funding under the fund.
The figures listed on the slide represent the maximum federal cost share for projects being funded, which vary based on where the project is located and the eligible recipient. These percentages are for eligible projects only. The maximum funding amount that can be requested per project is $50 million. The total Canadian government stacking limits are 100%, which essentially means that the total project costs can be funded by various levels of Canadian government, be they federal, provincial, territorial, or municipal. However, all sources of funding from all levels of government cannot exceed the total costs of the project. Finally, applicants will have to identify all other funding sources of the remaining costs that would not be covered by the Active Transportation Fund. You will be asked in the application form whether the funding is secured. Projects located in Indigenous communities are eligible for 100% of eligible costs. As an example, municipalities qualify for a cost share of up to 60% of eligible costs. To qualify for the funding, you will be required to identify the sources for the remaining 40% of costs, which can be from municipal budget, funding from the provinces or territories, fundraising, or third-party contributors. There are very thorough explanations on total costs, eligible and ineligible costs in the step-by-step guide for capital projects that is available on the website and on the HICC funding portal. We invite you to consult these documents for additional information.
Before you apply, here are a few items of note. First, expenditures incurred prior to project approval are ineligible. The only exceptions are expenditures related to meeting federal requirements, such as environmental assessments or consultation and engagement with Indigenous communities and organizations. Second, cost increases or overruns will not be covered by HICC, so please make sure that the project application includes contingency amounts according to the stage of the project. For details on contingency amounts, please refer to the step-by-step guides section on financials. Third, project construction should not start before project approval or prior to determination of any required environmental assessments, or Indigenous consultations. However, an applicant may apply for funding for future or subsequent phases of a project. For example, as part of a subsequent phase of a larger project that is constructing a bike path, the applicant may apply for a capital project to expand the bike path so it connects to transit stations or enhance user experience by installing benches or lights, etc. Finally, all projects should be completed by March 31st, 2030. The applicant will have to provide information on project schedule when submitting their application for funding. On the topic of eligible and ineligible expenditures, the Active Transportation Fund defines eligible expenditures as those that are considered to be direct and necessary for the successful implementation of an eligible project, except those explicitly identified as ineligible in Section 6.2 of the applicant guide. Capital expenditures can include items such as planning and design, provided that it forms part of a larger capital project for the construction or enhancement of active transportation infrastructure. This slide lists examples of ineligible expenditures. Please consult Section 6.2 of the applicant guide for more detailed descriptions of eligible and ineligible items. Please note that land acquisition, as well as all costs related to operation and maintenance, are ineligible.
The Active Transportation Fund is a merit-based funding program. As such, projects applications will be assessed against a set of merit criteria, including the following. First, the Active Transportation Fund will assess the economic benefits of the project that encourages contributions to local economies and provides cost-effective transportation alternatives to motorized vehicles for Canadian families. For example, applicants may describe how their project supports jobs within the community during the construction of this project and/or lead to household transportation savings through vehicle trips avoided or increased foot traffic to businesses. Second, applications will be assessed on environmental and climate benefits to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to fund resilient active transportation infrastructure projects. The applicant should describe if a project results in environmental benefits, such as implementing climate risk reduction and GHG mitigation measures into the design of the project. Lastly, the project will be assessed on social inclusion benefits that will help the general population and will respond to the specific needs of vulnerable, underserved, and higher needs groups within the communities. The applicant could describe how the project improves connectivity within the community, or how it improves safety and security for groups which are more likely to use active transportation out of necessity rather than choice.
Applicants are required to provide information to help HICC determine if the project requires consultation with Indigenous peoples and/or an environmental impact assessment. The Government of Canada has a duty to consult and, where appropriate, accommodate Indigenous peoples when it contemplates a decision or activity that might adversely impact Aboriginal or treaty rights. HICC will review the application to determine whether the project requires consultation with Indigenous peoples and inform the funding recipient. Early engagement by proponents with Indigenous peoples is essential to assist HICC in fulfilling its duty to consult. Should you have costs associated with Indigenous engagement and consultation incurred prior to the project approval, those costs may be eligible for reimbursement if the project is approved. Depending on the scope of a project and its location, an environmental impact assessment may be required prior to undertaking certain activities, such as the construction or the expansion of an existing infrastructure, to ensure that the project is not likely to cause significant adverse environmental effects. Applicants are responsible for providing sufficient information for HICC to determine whether a project may require an environmental impact assessment under the Federal Impact Assessment Act, Northern regulatory regimes, or a modern treaty. A municipal or provincial environmental or impact assessment may also be required. Please note, no construction can start and no funding can flow until Indigenous consultation requirements are met and any required environmental impact assessments are completed. Further details can be found in Annex C of the step-by-step guide and at the HICC website consultation with Indigenous peoples and environmental impact assessment pages, links for which can be found in the description.
This slide represents a summary of the funding process. There are 5 main stages. First, the applicant will submit their project application through the HICC funding portal. Second, HICC will conduct project eligibility and merit assessments based on the information provided in the application. Applications will be assessed based on a predetermined list of criteria. We encourage you to refer to the applicant guide for capital projects that is available on the Active Transportation Fund webpage for further information on these criteria. HICC may also request additional information from applicants using the contact information provided in the applicant profile. Third, HICC will make funding recommendations by taking into consideration various factors mentioned before. Final funding decisions will remain at the sole discretion of the minister. Fourth, successful applicants will be notified by a letter confirming approval in principle of funding for their project, and HICC will work with the recipient to finalize a funding agreement. Funding agreements will include payment conditions and reporting requirements. Finally, as the project is implementing, recipients will be required to update HICC on the status of their projects along with the submission of claims for payments until project completion and closeout.
As previously mentioned, applications are to be submitted through HICC's funding portal. To submit an application, step 1 would be to create your organization's account. If you are a returning applicant, please ensure that you have the correct account permissions for your organization's account. A short HICC funding portal walkthrough video in the link below provides step-by-step guidance on how to create an account and access the application form. On the HICC funding portal, you will be able to create, save, edit, and submit applications for capital projects for the Active Transportation Fund. Once you are logged in, you can begin your application. We suggest you use the step-by-step guide for capital projects side by side as you start the application. The step-by-step guide goes into detail on what to include in each field and provides examples. You will find the links below for all guidance materials such as the step-by-step guide and the applicant guide. And finally, here are some tips on creating an application. Failure to write a complete, accurate, and comprehensive application may result in rejection of an application if information required to determine if a project is eligible or meritorious is not provided. The application must describe how the project will support the objectives of the fund and satisfy the fund's merit criteria. Another thing to note is to be mindful of the text limit for fields requiring a narrative answer. It's a good idea to review all the questions in one section prior to creating your responses. Note that some questions may require you to expand on previous sections. And finally, we recommend accessing the funding portal and beginning the application as far in advance as possible, so that you have the opportunity to review all available information and reach out if any clarification is required. Also, we recommend saving as often as possible throughout the process to avoid losing your progress.
This concludes the presentation. As mentioned, further information can be found in the applicant guide, the step-by-step guide, and on the website, where you will also find a handy FAQ section. Should you not find the information you are looking for online, you are welcome to send an email to the Active Transportation Fund's general inbox, the address for which you will see on the slide. Thanks for watching this presentation, and we wish you an active day.